Good evening, everybody. This is Brendon Baillod back again for episode 2 of the restoration of my 1865 Thompson's Coast Pilot for the Great Lakes. I thought I'd start off tonight with a little bit of more background because a couple of people have asked for a little bit more information about the Coast Pilots. I'd like to refer everyone first and foremost to a paper that I wrote and published in Inland Seas last year called the Great Lakes Coast Pilot Wars, where I give a complete history of how these coast pilots came to be from Thomas Thompson and James Barnett and the various people who were involved in bringing these coast pilots into publication. And I kind of tell their story. So I refer you to that. But I'll tell you a little bit more about them. So I've got my coast pilots sitting right here. The first two coast pilots really was called Thompson's Coast Pilot. And Thompson's was published first in 1858, and it was published by Thomas Thompson, but James Barnett printed it in Chicago. Thompson was a lake captain. Barnett had been really a sailor back in Scotland, and he was quite a bit younger than Thompson. Thompson was not a very polished individual. He was an old-time lake skipper, and Barnett, conversely, was a printer and knew the printing business, was able to get maps printed for the book, and was able to get the book into publication. So when it became a big success, because there was a huge need for coast pilot books on the Great Lakes, Barnett tried to take more credit perhaps than he was due. Thompson and Barnett had a big falling out, and the result was that Barnett published his own Barnett's Coast Pilot for the Great Lakes, whereas Thompson kept publishing his Thompson's Coast Pilot. These are some of the early coast pilots from Barnett and Thompson. That both men despised each other and carried on about it in the press towards each other. So it makes for an interesting backstory between these two different coast pilots. The books are actually quite valuable now, and as I said in the last episode, they're asking around $1,000 a piece, but I've never seen them actually sell for that. They really, I think, are more in, depending on the condition, more the $200 to $500 range. The Thompsons and Barnetts stayed around for quite a while. They got quite a bit thicker. This is a later Thompson's Coast Pilot right here in really nice shape. And this is the only other Barnetts I have from 1880. It's a pretty thick one. It's got a beautiful set of capstan and windlass ads in it from the American Capstan Company, the Ship Windlass Company from Providence, Rhode Island. This Thompson's is just about the cleanest one I've ever seen. Really nice books. I've restored all of these myself. This one didn't need too much. It's interesting, when I buy these, I usually ask about the provenance. Where did the people get them from? And it's surprising. They come from all over the country. This came from California. It was in a collection from somebody who had come from the Great Lakes and brought it with them. Likewise with this one, it came from the American South. So these things find their way all over the lakes. The book I was working on in the last episode is right here. This is an earlier Thompson's Coast Pilot. What you'll notice is that I've got the board back on, and I'll give you a little bit of a tour of that. I did have to put a new hinge in, which I made out of Japanese kozo paper. So you can see it's a little light colored. I'm going to do what's called tea staining on that to darken it to the same color as the old paper around it. I had to do significant gluing in the spine. This book was actually broken in half. It was only being held together by a very slim piece up here, and you could literally lift it up and it would come in two. So I did have to put a lot of glue in the spine, but when I did that, it really solidified it nicely. So the book is perfectly handleable now. It really turned out quite well. I have a little more cosmetic work to do. I think I am going to put in Japanese kozo paper in the back hinge as well. And I think that'll really render this book very solid. Then I have some cosmetic work to do. You're going to see there's some light color along here. That's going to require a little bit of cosmetic work. I've opted not to use kozo on the spine. I do think I am just going to color it, and then that'll make it not stand out as much. But this should be a nicely restored and usable copy for research. So I will show you some of that here, and you'll get to see me do some work on it. All right. Well, in our last episode, I did quite a bit of work on this book, and I wanted to review a little bit about what we talked about last time. So during our last episode, I reviewed what I had done with the spine here and some of the damage to it. You can see I did a little bit of coloring here, where it's not quite as white as it had been. One of the things that I noticed about this Coast Pilot when we did our walkthrough is that somebody had already glued it with something. I would guess that it had been glued with Elmer's school glue. Now, Elmer's school glue isn't particularly acidic, right? But it's not archival. And why do I say that? Well, Elmer's school glue, it does not dry in a pliable way. It dries hard. And it cracks and breaks. It dries in a very brittle way. And so if you use Elmer's school glue on an antiquarian book and you open up, the book literally will break in half. It gives it the consistency of glass. It makes the binding just hard and brittle, so that when you open it, it literally breaks. I've had at least 2 or 3 books that were repaired with Elmer's school glue that have broken in half, and this was no exception. This book split right in half. And so what I had to do, I have a technique that I use with books that have been glued with school glue, and that is that I will take, at the break where they're busted, let's see if I can even find it, and I'll glue it, of course, but then I'll take a piece of paper and I'll put it in between, because the glue oozes out, right, like you see here. It oozes out, and it gets on the page otherwise. But because there's nothing really between the page and the spine on here, this is bound in boards, and so you can literally see the signatures right through that break. You need something to hold the glue. So what I'll do is I'll put a piece of paper, another piece of paper in between after I glue, and I'll close the book on that piece of paper. Now, some of the paper adheres a little bit. You can see this. It's adhered a little bit. But it's sapped up that glue, and the paper has essentially become a substrate now to hold that spine together. And so it's an interesting technique that I learned several years ago. And now this book is, perfectly glued together, and that paper that I introduced in between the 2 pages and into the binding has effectively held the book together. And now you can open it, and because I've used PVA, polyvinyl acetate glue, instead of a brittle glue, it's pliable. And so the book can be opened and you don't have to worry about it breaking. So that's a very positive thing. All right, I'm going to go check my focus here. Looks pretty good. It would need to be. All right, so in the last episode, one of the things we talked about doing was tea staining, or actually tonight we did. This piece of Japanese kozo that I laid in on the spine. And you can see it's much whiter than the neighboring pages. So in order to make that a similar color, what a lot of people will do is something called tea staining. And this is a technique used by fraudulent antiquarians everywhere, but it's also used by restorers. And you can see what I'm doing is I'm taking some really nice Earl Grey that I actually was enjoying here tonight, and I am getting it wet. This will dry pretty quickly, actually. You can see it's taking on a color that's pretty similar to the rest of the paper. So next thing I'm going to do is dab that. We don't need too much of it, right? We don't want to get it in the paper too much. You can see there's a little bit over here. I'm going to just set this in one of these pieces of paper to protect the rest of it. All right, and we will leave this be. And this should be considerably darker. If it needs it, I may lay in another bit of tea staining later, and that will keep it darkening a little more successively. All right. But for now, the other thing I'm going to show you that I'm going to work on is a little bit of glue work, a little fine glue work. So I've got a little pool of PVA glue on a paper plate here. That's generally how I work. And you can see that this piece of the spine is still pulled up here, 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 here. And what we want to do is we want to get some glue under there and push that down so it closes up. And you can actually see there's some strands coming off here. We don't want that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a little PVA glue on a toothpick. You can see I've got just enough on there. And I'm going to work it just into this gap here, like that. Right? And it doesn't take a whole lot. And if I frequently use my finger if I get some where I don't want it. Now this is going to dry pretty shiny. So you want to be judicious about how much you use. You don't want a big shiny blob of glue on here. Right? And so what you want to be able to do is push this down and then have it stay down. And this is tacky already. I let this glue dry a little bit. So it's already going to tack just a little. There we go. So I'm going to push this down. There. And when that dries, it will not come off. It's a very, like I say, it dries with the consistency of a leather or a vinyl. So you can see how time consuming this is. When I restore a book like this using these techniques, it's very painstaking. But the end result is that you have a book that looks really good, you know, and you're saving the original materials, right? You're not slapping it into a library binding, destroying the original textured materials that this was originally bound with. So you can see how this sliver is coming off here. I've pushed that in, so that's going to stay. Also, like, you know, this would have caught on stuff as you know, if you slid the book over a surface, it would have caught eventually and ripped upward. You have to be careful when you do this that you don't touch anything that has glue on it. There's a little bit of tacky glue here on the side of the thing. I don't want to get my hand on that and then put it on the book. You also need a fairly clean surface. This is not dirty. It's got some dried ink on it, but it won't come off on the book. Normally, I don't show when I work on the books because it is very, honestly, a little boring to watch. And it, in addition to being boring, I don't like to film when I work because I have to narrate. Otherwise, it's kind of boring. And I find that I'm not giving it enough concentration. So I'm going to just do a little here, like this, along here where there is no. What you don't see here, I've colored this a little already. That's actually the Kozo paper from underneath that you see there. Anytime you have these exposures, I do like to put glue on them. The reason where you see exposed substrate, because it protects it from moisture and flaking off. So you're going to see that I'm going to wipe a little of that off, even though it's going to dry clear. Okay, so I'm going to push this down wherever I can. I'm going to push it down. And one of the nice things about working with a glue that's already a little bit pre-tacky, like this, is that when I push down this material, it's going to stay down. All right, and so this is about as good as I need it to get. So this is going to all stay really nicely. All right. Let's see what else we can do. I've already glued this to my satisfaction. I will show you this. I'm going to glue this a little bit. Now, why would I put glue on that? Well, there are a couple of things I can do with that. I could actually put cellugel on that. Now, cellugel is made for leather, right? But what it is it's vegetable fibers in an alcohol colloidal suspension. And so if I put cellugel on this, it actually kind of seals it at the end there. If I put glue on it, it's going to look shiny. It'll hold it down, but it looks a little bit shiny. So I'm kind of debating what I should do. It's not into the book really badly. This I think I do need to make a hinge for. I think I will put I think I'll put a little glue on it, honestly. I'll let you watch that. So since I have the glue here and it's tacked. So what this will do is it'll keep this where it doesn't have a laminate over it like the rest of the cover. It'll keep it from fraying further. It'll stop any damage. And I'll show you right now. You can see how this looks kind of white and nasty. But wait, you'll see what I do with it. Alright, so I've got that glue on there. Then what I do is I go over it with my finger. Like this. So when this dries, this will be completely sealed. I'll put a little bit more just on here, on this edge, from the inside. There we go. Now, let that take on some let it lay down. Okay, and you'll see what'll happen is this will be sealed now is the right word for it, I guess. I've sealed it from further damage and from any elements. So that's a good fix. And what I will do then is I'll take this. I don't want that to sit on the table, so I'll put a pencil under it like that. So that is this part of it. I'm going to come back in a little bit because I want to let this dry, and then I'll put another bit of tea on it. So we'll come back in a little bit. All right. Well, it's the next day, and I think I've wrapped up my work on this book. So I could have done more, but at some point, knowing how to restore a book best is knowing when to stop, when to leave patina, when to not be more invasive. So I'm going to review what I did to this book. I'm going to show you a little bit about the improvements that I made. So the big thing I did, obviously, is I retouched the front board, and I used a Kozo paper hinge, Japanese Kozo. I also used Jade 403 PVA glue on the outside. So one of the biggest problems this book had was that it was broken in half, literally, right along the spine here. I had to do a technique where I put paper inside where the split was. You can't even see it anymore. I probably couldn't even find it between the pages where the book was broken in half at the spine, and impregnated that with PVA glue, and it literally mended that spine. So you can see it'll open now there, and it doesn't come in half. It doesn't even almost come in half. It's very strong. You could, handle this book pretty aggressively without it opening. One of the biggest things you're going to notice that I did here is I colored. So I could have used Kozo. I chose not to. At a distance, you'll notice that it doesn't draw the eye anymore, where it's missing the original material, the original textured material. Coloring it doesn't do any harm. You could always put material over that in the future if you want to. And so I used a watercolor. I used a brown watercolor on here. You'll also notice that I colored here, where you could see the Kozo paper through there. One of the problems with using PVA glue is that it dries shiny. Now, I have used PVA glue where I have mixed in, a powdered pastel coloring crayon, and flaked it off and stirred it up and colored the PVA glue. It still is shiny. I don't find that it textures any differently. So you don't necessarily see that shininess unless you really look for it, but it is there. Likewise on the back side, there's even more of it, potentially. But it doesn't really draw the eye unless you get right close up. Lastly, what I did, and you can see where I fixed, but I sealed this vermin damage here, where a rodent had chewed on the book, and it is now sealed with PVA glue, so it doesn't flake, or the pulp of the cardboard cover there is no longer directly exposed. The book is very usable now, eminently usable. You can flip through it. You don't have to be overly ginger with it. The ads in the course are really quite interesting in the back here. This book is now available for use by researchers, and can withstand handling, and is generally in pretty good usable shape. The main thing that I would say now about the outcome here is that the book's value has not been reduced by making it handleable again. What many people would do, as I said, is rebind this book. If you rebind this book, you destroy its collectible value for the most part, at the cost of making it usable again. I made this book usable again without destroying its collectible value, and I did some work to help preserve its aesthetics. So it does look old. The original patina's there, all the original contents are there, and I'm not going to go any further on it. I'm not going to try to cover this up any further, or make this look prettier. I could get rid of that shininess probably if I really wanted to, by putting like a graphite over it and making it darker. I've seen people do that. I'm not going to at this time, because I think the book is about where it needs to be. So again, thank you for watching. If you have any questions about book restoration, or if you have books that you would like restored, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to consult for free and give you my advice. And if you do want a restoration, a full-on restoration, I can give you a quote. So thanks for joining me. Have a good afternoon.